Oh, Stalin was a mighty man, and a mighty man was he. He led the Soviet people on the road to victory. All through the revolution, he fought at Lenin's side, and they made a combination till the day that Lenin died. He said, come all you people, we must work with brain and hand. And then one day the Nazis came into the Soviet land. They plundered to the Volga, to Stalingrad. And then Joe Stalin said, come on, me boys, and kicked them out again. Oh, Stalin was a southerner, in Georgia he was born.
Can I record it or?
You can if you like at your end, yes. So that'll be fine.
Okay, let me see. I don't know how to do it, but that's okay.
Okay, we're all good. So welcome back, everybody. It is the day of Tuesday, the January the 14th, and today I'm very pleased to be joined by Bahman Azad, who is joining us today to talk specifically about issues related to Iranian revolutionary history and current practice. And if you don't know Bahman from his appearances on the ICSS Marxist channel, he is the author of Heroic Struggle, Bitter Defeat, Factors Contributing to the Dismantling of the Socialist State in the USSR, which I would recommend any comrade who wants to find out more about the reasons, both internal and external, for the collapse of the USSR, that you add that to your reading list. He is also involved in the US Peace Council, and he is a member of the 10 Mayor Group, which is an Iranian communist group, which we will be talking about as we go on through this program. So, Bahman, welcome to the Marx Engels Lenin Institute channel.
Thank you very much, Comrade Alexander, and it is a great pleasure and honor for me to be invited to this program.
Well, thank you for joining me, and I think this is going to be an episode which will attract a lot of attention due to the fact that, as we will come to when we discuss Iranian history and Iran today, the history of Iran since the period of the Islamic Revolution of 1979 is one which has been a real dividing line within the Western left between those who I would define as consistently anti-imperialist and those who collapse into opportunism when it comes to nations like Iran and are unable to analyze them properly. And one of the reasons I wanted to speak to you is because I think your analysis of this actually goes through the multiple the contradictions and the progressive elements and the reactionary elements within Iran to reach an actual properly Marxist and balanced conclusion about the system there. So I think this is a conversation which comrades are going to find very useful. But Bahman, I wanted to begin with just asking you for your analysis as to the historical significance of the revolution in Iran that overthrew the Shah and ultimately brought about the creation of the Islamic Republic in 1979. I'd like to start with getting your reflections on that, the significance of that event.
Well, as we all know historically, the Pahlavi dynasty, Pahlavi regime started in, I think, 1920s with the coup, British coup, that brought the last Shah's father to power. That coup was a stage actually in order to redirect Iran's constitutional revolution, which was actually being helped and supported by social democrats in Soviet Union, to turn it into a kind of a monarchy instead of because there were calls of republic and all that involved, and the Shah's father was responsible for that coup with the help of the British for two reasons. One was to avoid Iran becoming a republic, and second, to be part of the kind of a belt around the Soviet Union in terms of the Western buffer zone, which they did more or less the same thing in Turkey. So it was kind of a security zone for the West, keeping the Soviet Union to have some access to the southern regions of the West Asia. So that was the reason. But one of the main missions and responsibilities or things that he had to do was to crush the Communist Party in Iran, Communist Party of Iran, which was being helped and supported by Lenin and the revolutionaries in Russia, so in Soviet Union, and they really brutally crushed the Communist Party as a part of this whole project. Of course, the same way after that the Europeans after World War II started to give some social concessions to the European public in a form of social democracy to stop the expansion of the socialist idea into Europe. The Shah's father also did the same thing with some reforms in terms of establishing universities or doing this and that, creating a strong central government and doing some modernization of the country. But that was, in a sense, kind of a part of a plan to stop the spread of socialist ideas into Iran after the Russian Revolution. So he ruled for about, I think, 16, 20 years until World War II, when he sided with Germany, Nazi Germany, and he was removed from power by the same powers that brought him to power, sent him to South Africa. His son was brought to power, which coincided with the election of Mossadegh as prime minister and the whole oil nationalization that went on in Iran. And Mossadegh again was brought down by a coup, by a joint US, UK, British coup that brought him down and brought back all the Iranian oil industry into the hands of the Western powers. Shah also ruled for about 25 years with iron fist. Again, attacked the Tudeh party, which was formed after his removal, for his father's removal in 1920s, was formed and gained very, very broad popular support and had a strong support among the workers, especially in the oil workers, among the oil workers and others. So again, the coup, 1953 coup that the CIA and MI6 brought to power was aimed with the same mission of blocking any independence of Iran from the West and also crushing the communist and left movement in the country. That ended in a popular revolution. Probably some people have called it one of the greatest revolutions of the 20th century, in fact, after the October Revolution. And indeed it was, because it removed Iran as one of the three main pillars of Western domination, US domination in the region, together with Israel and Saudi Arabia. And from that point on, the US has been in trouble. US domination has been in trouble. Iran internationally switched side. One of the main reorientations was moving the non-aligned movement. They kicked out 60,000 US military personnel and advisors from the country. They kicked the Israeli, or shut down the Israeli embassy and turned it over to the PLO. They took side with the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. They actually changed the name of the street where British embassy was located in Tehran to Bobby Sands Street. And transformed the society internally. It transformed and made a lot of important transformations. The first thing, the constitution that was adopted, in a sense, the structure of the economy became what we communists know as a non-capitalist economic development path. Articles of the Constitution gave priority to the public sector, with all major basic industries in the hand of the state, controlled by the state. Then the cooperative sector, and interestingly, defined the private sector as what is left out of the other two. So that's one of the most progressive constitutions. That was a direct threat to capitalist control in many ways. And so, I mean, genetically, U.S. imperialism had problems with that kind of orientation, internal orientation. And because of that, similar uprising immediately happened in Iraq and Saudi Arabia, especially in the oil fields, in support of the Iranian revolution, and they had to crush them internally. But that set Iraq and Saudi Arabia immediately against the Iranian revolution because they saw it as a direct threat to their own.
Yes.
So Iran changed the Middle East tremendously, and the revolution. And as you know, whatever we are witnessing today going on for the past 30, 40 years, which has been based on Iran's anti-imperialist orientation in the Middle East and in the world. Of course, many times half-heartedly, but generally the direction was that, and this was something that was not tolerable to the United States and U.S. and the global imperialism. So they did everything they could. They tried coup d'etats, didn't work. They tried some kind of pressures, economic pressures, sanctions immediately. They used that embassy takeover as an excuse to immediately impose broad sanctions on Iran. And finally, when the coup, neither of them worked, they resorted to the war, that was Iraqi invasion that lasted 8 years and really not only caused tremendous casualties for Iran and the population of Iran and destroyed the basic infrastructure of the country. It has also had a huge negative impact on the balance of forces within the country and kind of strengthened first the hand of the merchant commercial capital, which during the wartime Iranian economy was based on, under sanctions, was based on importing all the necessities and even arms and everything else from abroad. And the merchants got fatter and fatter, importers, and really gained economic power and took over the parliament in many ways and helped Rafsanjani to start a campaign in favor of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund to kind of push a neoliberal economic policy in Iran. And in a way, that war contributed to reorientation of Iranian economy generally. So we have been struggling for 40 years to bring Iranian revolution back to its original rail, and we're still continuing, and we are hoping that we will be successful. Although those who started to push it in the other direction are unfortunately now regained power and are pushing it their own favorite direction.
Well, I think there's a couple of points just to pick up and re-emphasize there, Bahman, from what you said. It's generally forgotten that there were uprisings in, as you said, Iraq and Saudi Arabia in the end of the 1970s that were inspired by the Iranian Revolution. These were, of course, brutally crushed. The Saudi one has been largely erased from history in the West, like it's never mentioned. The only opponents of the Al Sauds that are mentioned in the West are like the supposedly Al Qaeda type figures. But there was a lot of trouble in Saudi Arabia in the end of the 1970s, which the Saudi regime only just managed to survive, and they have been, as you said, until very recently, open and dedicated enemies of Iran, but also for Iraq as well. Like the Ba'athist government there not only allowed itself to be turned into a tool of U.S. imperialism, but it ultimately, I would say, not only led to a disaster for the people of Iran, but also a disaster for the people of Iraq, in the way that the Baathists there allowed themselves to be used by imperialism. They were pushed into a war and devastated, very severely weakened Iraq, and also indebted them to the Saudis and others to the tune of billions of dollars, and ultimately led to the destruction of that government. And imperialism turned on them in the end anyway, as it always does. So it's a very destructive path that the Iraqi government went on, that ultimately destroyed it. And I think it's a sobering lesson for anybody who thinks that you can make deals with imperialism that it will be long lasting, because Saddam Hussein thought he had a deal with imperialism, and look what happened to him. At various stages, Muammar al-Gaddafi thought he had a deal with the US and the British, and look what happened to him. And most recently, the people who ran Syria, particularly in the period after the death of Hafez al-Assad, they thought at various stages they had a deal with imperialism, and that it did not work, because, as you were saying when you referred to Iran's anti-imperialist orientation, even the smallest amount of anti-imperialism is too much. The smallest amount of sovereignty is too much. So I think that this is something that the Western left, particularly the certain people who call themselves Maoists, even certain Marxist-Leninists, don't seem to understand, that any amount of sovereignty, any amount of ability to say no to US imperialism is too much. So I don't know if you have any response to anything I've just said there before we proceed.
No, I totally agree. It is one thing that I think is we have to add to the equation is that this new phase of the dominance of finance capital over the whole global situation has changed the whole kind of a structure of domination. And in many ways, if you remember, in the 1970s, 80s, the system relied on strong, heavy-handed dictators to maintain U.S. domination in the countries. But since the ascent or total control after the dismantling of the USSR and the socialist camp, when the financial system became under absolute domination and control of the West, and the rise of this new liberal economic policy, the West has been moving in the opposite direction of creating weak states or failed states have their gates open to the U.S. capital and Western capital, and can allow free flow of.
Yes.
So, in a sense, even the old dictators that they themselves had created, they had to get rid of because they wanted to create this new system. And that was my additional comment on that.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, because even if you look at a deeply reactionary regime such as the old Indonesian regime of General Suharto, even that a regime like that had to carry out a certain degree of industrialization, and modernization of the country, even if it did so in a very brutal and exploitative fashion. Same with Taiwan under the Kuomintang and Chiang Kai-shek. Same with even like South Korea had to be industrialized and modernized. And now we are in this very parasitic period that as you correctly observe, where the only thing that imperialism requires is unlimited movement of capital, unlimited movement of labor, and unlimited ability to asset strip a country, so that not even the sovereignty they allowed of Suharto is allowed. Which leads me to another question, which I did mention in our preparation for this, but I think it's worth bringing up now. which is, it seems to me, looking at the current state of play in Iran, particularly the new president Pezeshkian, and the forces that are behind him. And I'd appreciate it if you could talk a little bit about those. But it seems that these pro-capitalist forces in Iran, the capitalist class, many of them seem to think that there is some deal to be done with US imperialism, that there is some kind of accommodation that can be made. They don't seem to understand, or maybe they just don't want to understand, that even their position would be destroyed in the end. Imperialism, once it's used them, will toss them aside and find somebody weaker, somebody much even more compliant. So it seems that some of these bourgeoisies don't want to learn the lesson of the last 30 years. And I'd appreciate your comment on that, and why you think it is that even after everything that's gone on since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, even after all of that, these bourgeois elements still refuse to learn the obvious lesson.
Well, I wouldn't put it that way, although I agree with you. I wouldn't say they're not learning the lessons. They are acting on their class interest instincts. And
Yes.
I mean, they have no other choice in many ways. Let me go back, because we're talking about the Iranian bourgeoisie. Maybe we could just give a picture of divisions or categorizations within the Iranian bourgeoisie. The new liberal bourgeoisie in Iran started with, ascended to power during Rafsanjani's time, if you remember, and continued for the past 40 years. They have been dominant. But Iran's history ruling class has not been limited to just new liberal bourgeoisie. We have different groupings or categories or segments of the bourgeoisie that have different interests in many ways. I want to bring it to the question of the historical process first before I talk about the present. We had, as I mentioned to you, commercial capital, merchant capital that had its own interest as a commercial capital and did a lot of tremendous amount of trade with the West, and their position was clear pro-West. Alongside the new liberal bourgeoisie that was really accommodating international capital. But there was, after the revolution, it was the emergence of what we label as state bureaucratic capital. And you see this category of capital among most of the countries that have precious natural resources like oil that their economy depends on, and that creates the opportunity for these categories of bourgeoisie to build up around that state resource, like basically mostly start as contractors with the state for projects. And, in a sense, I would call U.S. military-industrial complex as a bureaucratic bourgeoisie, in a sense that they are kind of sucking the resources off the state to survive and to make profit. So that kind of category of bourgeoisie emerged as a result of war and as a result of the external pressures that required a more strong state to survive the external pressures. This bureaucratic bourgeoisie was further strengthened after the war, when the responsibility for rebuilding the Iranian economy was relegated to Iran's Revolutionary Guards. Was the only entity on the side of the state that had the capability of getting involved in big projects, big economic projects nationally. and carried it out. Since the revolution, the private sector did not have that kind of accumulation of capital to be able to do it, as a private party. So the Iranian Revolutionary Guards became the conduit for a lot of these funds to be transferred for projects into agriculture, banking, shipbuilding, all kinds of things, finance. So gradually, a stronger bureaucratic bourgeoisie developed along these projects that became, were dependent on the state funding of all these projects, but gradually privatization happening through Rafsanjani, all of these became contractors for the state, for the Revolutionary Guards to carry out all those projects. So at the same time, if you look at it, neoliberal bourgeoisie wants a small state, no interference in the economy, no restriction, no labor law, no nothing, right? Open door foreign trade and everything else. But this bureaucratic bourgeoisie heavily relies on the strength of the state, its ability to control the situation and to continue the flow of the resources towards it. So in a sense, it is looking for a stronger state that is in control of the resources that can provide them, feed them with those resources. So in a sense, that bureaucratic bourgeoisie was more for independence alongside the Revolutionary Guards, alongside the left wing of the Islamic movement, which was more tied to the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, right? Until, but battle between neoliberal wing and the kind of, I would call it left wing of the leadership, continued for 40 years. If you remember, while Rafsanjani and the neoliberals were dealing with the United States, negotiating on nuclear deal and everything else, the left wing was fighting in the region through Soleimani, Sardar Soleimani, and others, right?
Yes.
Two different prongs of coming out of the same state, right? And this battle and competition was going on as to what direction Iran will take. Finally, things got to a point when, in the last election, when President Raisi was elected, the left got the upper hand. Up to that point, if you look at all of the governments or presidents that were elected, were mostly from the reformist pro-West wing of the capital, neoliberals. This time, of course, some manipulation was involved also, because this more firm decision-making on the part of Iranians came more or less after Russia took its special forces into Ukraine and showed that the whole balance of situation is changing. This kind of emboldened the left in Iran to take more action. And that's why they moved to the left and managed to elect President Raisi, who would take a more pro-East policy. And the Iranian direction changed toward that. And Iran became more involved with China, with Russia, and with the South, global South. And of course, with Venezuela, if you remember, bypassing US sanctions for Venezuela, and all those activities were going on. So, and this is something that neither for the neoliberal bourgeoisie in Iran nor for the US imperialism was tolerable at all. It was really dangerous for them. Because as you remember, whenever they talked about the enemy, there's a tri-party enemy: China, Russia, Iran, China, Russia, Iran, China, Russia. Iran had taken a role, and a significant role, in this campaign toward multipolar world, and really taking an active role in every aspect of it, joining BRICS. So this is when they felt the threat, that it's becoming serious.
Yes.
If Iran moved really fully toward the east, that would be in many ways. And if you remember the whole battle within the West Asia, Middle East region also intensified with this. So this, neither Israelis, nor United States and U.S. imperialism could tolerate such a move by Iran. And that is why they had to put an end to it. And it came in the form of the crash of Raisi's helicopter.
Yes.
We believe that was a political assassination, not an accident.
Yes.
The Iranian government, probably due to its own considerations, does not want to take it to that level, because that would create probably additional responsibility for response. So they kept it quiet in a sense, but not that they stopped the project, but they didn't declare that as an terrorist act or something like that. And they're mere suspicious that certain wings of this bourgeoisie, internal bourgeoisie, was also involved in it. It was very improbable that it could happen remotely that way.
Well, it certainly, as you say, Bahman, it certainly suited the agenda of the U.S. imperialists, their proxies in Israel. Maybe the British might have been involved in the act as well, given their history in Iran, as you already outlined. But also the fact is that, as you correctly point out, that there were President Raisi and the forces he represented, as you say, were posing a threat to the existing balance of class forces inside Iran itself. And some elements in Iran were, at the very least, happy to see Raisi gone, and his replacement, of course, being Pezeshkian, a man who is, I think I'm being accurate when I say he is very heavily associated with those elements that are called in the West reformist, but in Iran, I would say that these are more reactionary elements. Is that a fair characterization?
Absolutely. The thing is, the neoliberal capital in Iran for 40 years destroyed the economy to a level that it had no credibility. The opposition, not opposition, dissatisfaction, disillusionment with the revolutionary process among the lower classes, among the working people, the inflation, the unemployment, all of those elements that you see in any situation that is linked to the neoliberal economic policy.
Yes.
For a long time had negatively affected Iran's internal situation. So, and Iranians clearly knew that the reformists, the so-called reformists on the right side, pro-West reformists, are disaster, and they have witnessed it and touched it themselves for 40 years. So they could not win this election after Raisi if they had their own direct known representatives that were on, in front of the scene for the past 40 years. So they had to hide behind another person to push their agenda. Now, what happens is that Iran had a problem. This whole gross and broad dissatisfaction with the situation had taken a lot of people away from the elections. The participation in the elections was dropping one after the other, diminishing. And the West had started campaigns that this government is not legitimate because it never had more than 50% vote, for example, forgetting that the U.S. never has that either, but but the target of propaganda was Iran. So it seemed to us that after the attack, after the death of Raisi and the chaos that more or less it created for a short time, the government or the ruling class or the ruling circle thought that they should open the gates for nominations in a way that attracts more people to the elections, to the polls. And they kind of opened the door a little bit furthermore, and that allowed for types of Pezeshkian to participate. Pezeshkian we have put a long analysis of his cabinet, his work, and it's been translated. I'm sure we will publish it soon. Pezeshkian himself is an honest man. He's pro-revolution. He has self-declared follower of Ayatollah Khamenei. He is a religious man. But he's not a politician. He has been a surgeon, a doctor who has happened to be part of a member of parliament, right? But when he was nominated and he passed through the Guardian Council filtering, it was then that the pro-West reformists thought, lack of experience on his part, he is not a politician, he doesn't know much in terms of how to run a state. They decided that this would be good figurehead for them to move into the position of power. So they banked on him, they put all the resources behind him, they mobilized the middle upper classes of society in favor of him by bringing slogans from the chador and the veil to the minorities and the ethnic groupings and stuff like that, that there were dissatisfaction along those lines in society. But it is mostly class-based because most of the issues that Pezeshkian raised is this appeal to the upper and middle classes. Both cultural issues, they don't let us have music, they don't let us have drinks, they don't let us do this and that, And so all of those grudges that accumulated among the middle and upper classes in many ways was kind of voiced by Pezeshkian in that and mobilized that sector of the population. While the lower levels and the working class and others were all already disappointed and dissatisfied. And unfortunately, none of the candidates explicitly spoke to their interests.
Right.
While Pezeshkian spoke to the interests of the more affluent classes of society and the minorities. So in that sense, in Babylon, they managed with a very smart strategy, mobilized to win the elections. And now, the most prominent figure in the previous governments, pro-West, who was the main person who negotiated the nuclear deal with the West, Zarif, who was the foreign minister, is now the strategic deputy president, and he's controlling the foreign policy, and he's controlling the whole decision-making process in the Pezeshkian government. So in a sense, we are in a dilemma because it is not a wise thing to weaken the state at this stage in the face of external threats. At the same time, you want to grab and drag Pezeshkian and the president out of the control of the liberal class, the pro-West class. So it's a kind of complicated struggle that we are carrying out right now. It has to be a very kind of fine line, well-defined strategy of doing both at the same time.
Yeah, just to go back a moment there, Bahman, to something you mentioned, which is the fact that you say nobody in the presidential election where Pezeshkian won made an appeal to the working class, to the poor, to try and mobilize them to counter what the forces behind Pezeshkian were doing. So Jalili, who was the opposing candidate who lost to Pezeshkian, so he didn't make those appeals to the working class then.
No, he was asked to by the left forces, with the alliance of the left forces that we have created in Iran. I mean, we together with a lot of forces, we call it the unity of anti-imperialist left. In all these social democrats and fake lefts that are now siding with the West. We sent him an open letter, asked him to directly address this issue. Just being anti-West, anti-US is not enough. You have to have more specific class-based issues. And we asked him, but he didn't respond to that. And
Nice.
the working people and the oppressed masses did not see their interests kind of expressed in the positions it took. So that is, we feel, but still the gap was not that big. It was 14 million versus 17 million.
Hmm.
He could have won it if he did that, in our view. But
Yes. Well, this points to the Iran and its revolutionary history, because the Iranian Revolution, as you indicated in your original answer, Bahman, was the work of the Iranian masses. Its defense against the Ba'athist regime, which it tried to invade and destroy the revolution, was really a triumph of the heroism and self-sacrifice of the Iranian masses. And to hold out successfully against the pressure, and Trump promises so what he calls maximum pressure in the near future applied by imperialism. To my understanding, it can only this defense can only be properly conducted by mobilizing the Iranian masses again in a serious way. But of course, as you point out, when you're talking about the different class elements in play here, no one would be more opposed to that than certain elements in the Iranian capitalist class, it seems, who, like all capitalist classes, even those in countries which are subject to the aggression of imperialism, are always more afraid of their own masses than they are the imperialists. I mean, this isn't a new observation. The Engels made this observation of the Prussian bourgeoisie all the way back in the 1840s, that they would prefer the domination of the Junkers and the Kaiser to the mobilization of the peasants and the workers. So it seems we are in the same problem when in a country like Iran, which is only the masses can preserve and extend the revolution and defend the independence and sovereignty of Iran. But it is the very mobilization of those masses that the large elements of the Iranian bourgeois simply do not want to see that mobilization, because they know what that could mean.
This is exactly what happened. Absolutely, you're right. You see this, the bureaucratic capital that we're talking about, that was on the side of the state, more or less leaning toward opposing the West, was in a dilemma in this election. Because on the one hand, it didn't agree with the direct pro-West position of the neoliberals and Pezeshkian, and had some kind of affinity with Jalili's anti-West position. But from class point of view, it couldn't side with Jalili, who was being supported with lower class by lower classes. And the working people, majority of working people, they were not active, but they were there. They were anti-West, they were anti-neoliberal. They came in millions to show their opposition to the right-wing neoliberals in the body of Jalili. But Jalili was a threat, because if he would win, if he won the elections, then the whole bourgeoisie would be in trouble, because of the masses were moving behind Jalili. It was now masses participation that would determine the future. And that is why at the last minute, the bureaucratic bourgeoisie switched side and took side with the neoliberals, although they were not fully in support of their pro-West side. But from class point of view, they could not side with the masses on the other side. Although half of their interest was involved on the other side, they could not side with the masses. They sided with the neoliberals and won that election that way.
This is a very interesting discussion, I think, and it also feeds into our understanding of multipolarism, Bahman, as well, because not just with Iran, which has these contradictions, but also this, I think, also applies with Russia itself, which is where you have a national bourgeoisie there, which has been forced into a struggle to defend its own interests against the rapaciousness of the US, the British, and the French and the Germans. But at each stage, it had to be pushed into action, partially by the masses in the Donbass and their resistance against the Ukrainian pro-NATO regime, and also by domestic pressure. and also the Russian government, reflecting that national bourgeois, was then forced to lean more and more into the Soviet legacy as time went on and the sanctions got more severe. And so now you have something like, you see some things like the rehabilitation of Stalin on a much, much wider basis than you did 10 or 20 years ago. And you have like Russian bourgeois politicians who, people like Medvedev and Putin himself, who just a decade ago were still talking about, the greatness of, Solzhenitsyn and repeating all the anti-communist myths. Now they're going out and defending the Soviet legacy in the Great Patriotic War and burying their own past to a degree. But it points to an interesting contradiction in multipolarity in these countries, which is that you have, on the one hand, bourgeoisies forced into a struggle, and on the other hand, still afraid of the masses. Even now, I think that the Russian bourgeois are still afraid of mobilizing the Russian workers, because they know the history of the revolution there, that's still present, just as it is in Iran. So you have this contradiction, which will need to be solved eventually. And I just ask you for your view on this, because the breaking down of the power of US imperialism as this unipolar hyperpower, which has the ability to exploit anywhere in the world, that is, of course, a priority. The breaking of the power of that system has to be a priority for communists. But it is my view that that is a stage to get to. It's a vital stage, but it doesn't mean that the other struggles just conclude when that power is broken, because then you have a struggle for the future in nations like Iran, in nations like Russia, which will go on, a class struggle, which is not resolved by the ending of the power of US imperialism. So I'd ask you for your view on that.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have to make a distinction between a multipolarity and socialism here.
Yes.
Many people think that the road to multipolarity is automatically the road to socialism, which is not. We know that. We Marxists know that. We know that. So the question is, in my view, multipolarity just secures a prerequisite for the struggle, for the class struggle that has to come.
Yes.
Because we know, so long as there is no sovereignty and independence and for the people, and free from foreign intervention, class struggle will be distorted one way or another. It will not happen.
Yes.
So in a sense, multipolarity only gets us to the stage that we can once again go back to the real class struggle in a of the word. And we should not equate this process with the ultimate process that comes after this phase, in my view. It's maybe signs, maybe conditions are kind of prepared for that stage in this process, but this is not the process itself. So we have to distinguish between the two. And those who think we're rushing forward too much, not recognizing that in this process, a part of the national bourgeoisies of different countries have a stake too.
Yes.
If you go too far to the left on this and not understand, and for example, make a mistake of calling Russia and China same imperialist state, and that it's a war of imperialists, that's going too far on that side, or being intimidated by the US and imperialism, on the other hand, with the show of force and brutality that they put forth right now in the Middle East.
Yes.
Say, oh, okay, we lost it. I think both is bad error that we can make.
Yes.
Understand the complexity of the situation, understand all the factors that are involved, understand where the dividing line is, and which side of this dividing line we should stand, and it's not the same dividing line in all situations. Each situation calls for has a different dividing line, but we have to calculate it correctly and understand on the correct side of the divisions that exist everywhere. And that's my view. It's a very complex situation. But one thing I have been saying, and we have been saying, is that this is not going to come easy, because a declining imperialist power like the US will not relinquish its dominance so easily. And as we get closer and closer to a point of no return, they get more vicious and brutal to protect hegemony. And to me, because they knew, I think, that if they lost West Asia and Middle East, and it was close, not that far, they would lose the battle over the multipolar world. That would be the end.
Yes.
Of view.
Yes.
Well, I mean, of no return.
Yes, I think you're correct there, Bahman. Yeah, I think this is. I think I'd like your view on this. The question of like why the Israeli response to the October the 7th operation was so brutal and what has lasted so long is precisely for the reasons that you've been saying, which is that this was meant to be not just about suppressing Gaza. This was meant to be a message to the entirety of West Asia of what will happen if you dare resist, essentially. And this is, I mean, I'm glad I went back when October the 7th happened and I reread a book I hadn't read for many years, which is Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, where he talks about the level of brutality of French colonialism in Algeria, killing 40,000 people inside a month before the end of World War II. In an act of grotesque Nazi-like proportions. And then you look at the activities of the British in India, the British in Kenya, the Dutch in Indonesia. Every time resistance raises its head, this is the response, which is overwhelming force against civilian populations in an attempt to break the will of anybody to resist, because they can't win the military encounters against a risen people. And so my understanding of this was always a US operation with the Israelis pulling the trigger as a message to the entirety of the region to stamp their foot down and say, if you dare do anything, we will kill without limits. What's your view on that?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think this is not going to be the last one either, because in the path we are on, probably we will have more and more examples of such situation before we just get to the clear. They're going to inflict a lot of damage to us as we go forward. And I expect more. This is just only a fraction or a part of the brutality of the nature of the system. I think
yes,
much more of it.
Yes, exactly right. I'd like to just draw our conversation to a conclusion by asking you to talk about your group, the 10 Mayor Group, because I was very interested to find your group's analysis online when I first came across it, because we still see cited in the Western left the Tudeh party routinely as the representatives of Iranian communism. So I'd like you to talk a bit about the differences between your group and the Tudeh party, and what do you see the Tudeh party is actually representing today in comparison to its past?
Well, we have been so far avoiding to talk about the internal affairs to the party, but I'll share some of it with you because I feel I'm in the right place about it. I'm talking in the right place. I should pull you back to the history a little bit. In the history of it, this goes back to two important phases in the history of Iran and the world. One as you know, the Tudeh party under its previous leadership supported the Iranian Revolution, supported the Constitution of the Islamic Republic with, of course, reservations, supported the Ayatollah Khomeini's line, and so forth. And our comrades went to the battle during Iran-Iraq war on the side of the Muslims who were fighting. So it was a dedicated supporter of the revolutionary process in Iran. But the same neoliberal right wings who wanted to derail the revolution and move it to the West. First, US did it in terms of assassinating the top leaders of the Islamic Republic. If you remember, Ayatollah Beheshti, Ayatollah Bahunar, and others. That bomb that was placed in the headquarters of the Islamic Republic Party that killed 72 leaders of the Islamic Republic at once. So the assassinations of the left wing of the Iranian Revolution, the leadership of the Iranian Revolution, started immediately after the revolution. And then was completed by attack on the party in 1981-82. So the left of the Iranian revolution, left side, left wing, was assassinated one after the other, and then came to the actual Marxists, and they attacked the party and arrested, I think, about 90% of the central committee of the party and the leadership of the party, and killed some of them under torture, and some of them committed suicide, and some of them, Comrade Kianuri and Comrade Firuz with Comrade Amouyi, were placed under house arrest after years of spending in prison, but escaped execution. So anyway, what happened was that was the beginning of the first wave of deviation from the party line. The complaint was that by supporting these reactionary Muslim Islamic leaders and revolution, you made party vulnerable to all these attacks and everything else. So you're responsible for it yourself, right? That was the first claim. A lot of people from within the party dissociated from the party and complained that it's because of the wrong policy. So that was the first wave. After the attack, of course, new leadership was elected. In exile in Afghanistan. And one of the first steps they took was that they declared, they raised the slogan of overthrow of the Islamic Republic. They remained leadership, the new leadership. And this, of course, was withdrawn after a couple of meetings or sessions of the leadership. It was turned into expulsion or isolation of the supreme leadership or guardianship of which means that the system is bad. They withdrew from calling for overthrow. They said the system of guardianship of the revolution by religious leadership should be taken out. Okay, against Velayat al-Faqih. Okay, so that has been the line of party all the way. Came up until the second earthquake happened, and that was the dismantling of the USSR.
Yes.
And now the second wave became ideological. That all socialist ideas and socialism of the, real socialism and all that is nonsense. You see how bad they were and all that. And the Soviet Union was a mistake. It was a mistake to support the Soviet Union, and socialism is gone and finished. So an ideological split happened. A lot of people left on the second wave. But a good part of Marxist-Leninists, some of like us, stayed in the party to battle that redirection, because the party took that position. At the third Congress of the party, which happened in 1991, the first two were before the 1953 coup. During the Islamic Republic, there was no possibility of doing that. And so the third one was when the party came outside after the attack and all that. which we were participating also. The documents that were presented to the Congress as the party positions, party documents, were in support of full support of Gorbachev, human interests as opposed to class interests, kind of whitewashing the whole question of imperialism and reducing it. And in fact, we had a big debate even prior to the Congress, because I was working closely with top leaders, the second secretary of the party, Conrad, who was the leader of the Azerbaijan Democratic Party, who was a member of the political bureau, Comrade Safari. And he was the economist of the party and also ideologue in many ways. He was among the two leaders who were left from previous leadership. Comrade Khavari, who was the first general secretary, first secretary, was in Prague when the attack on the party came. And Comrade Safari left when the attack came, left the country. Although the party leadership, all of them had decided to stay and not leave the country. And that's why they were all executed, remained, stayed, and were executed. So anyway, those two remained and became the number one and number two leaders of the party abroad after the attack and after the collapse of Soviet Union, before the collapse of Soviet Union. And when this happened, I had my own debates with Comrade Safari over this, because I represented along with a couple of more other comrades, the Marxist-Leninist line that wanted to preserve the line of the party. And Comrade Safari had not given up ideologically, but he was looking at it tactically, that after all this that's happened to the Soviet Union and everything, socialist camp, it would be suicide for us to still proclaim Marxism-Leninism publicly. We should go back to the policy of the party after 1920 that came in with a milder agenda and is still controlled by communists behind the scene, but publicly have a softer social democratic line to avoid being isolated, because they're going to destroy us if you do that. And he used the example of 1920s.
Yes.
And I told him, Comrade Safari, you're wrong, mistaken, because in that situation with a softer line, you were coming out of the World War II, where the prestige of the Soviet Union was at its highest, as a hero of the people of the world. All intellectuals were turning toward communism. All the workers were coming toward the communist parties. Even if you let loose the ideology, everybody would become communist. But you are dealing with a situation after the collapse of the Soviet Union, dismantling of the USSR, that everybody is running away.
Yes.
Because of how many communists you keep at the top level. After the second Congress or the third Congress, the majority will be social democrats and will kick you out. You cannot do it that way. And he agreed. And he withdrew those parts of the constitution of the party that came to that point. Okay? But since he had already advocated this in the party, and there were already people who were leaning toward Gorbachev and kind of taken social democratic line, this line, they took advantage of his position as an ideological position, not a tactical position that he himself withdrew from, and tried to push the social democratic line within the party, and attack the previous leadership that they were responsible for the defeats of the past. I mean, both the Soviet Union and the Iranian leadership to the party leadership. And of course, it came with it that since the attack on the party had happened, the enemy number one became Islamic Republic, not the United States.
Right.
And this has been the line ever since.
I see.
Okay. But in the third Congress, the majority supported our Marxist-Leninist line. Okay, we forced them to remove that clause of human interest, all human interests and all that, and kind of modified it in a different way that meant anti-imperialism as human interest, things like that. We came to a compromise because it was not time for a split, but the Congress was moving toward the split. Okay, so we decided that we don't want to split, we want to fight it inside the party and all that. After several plenums, they finally purged us from the leadership.
Right.
And once they did that, we decided that we should create a Marxist-Leninist force from among those comrades who were in the leadership and purged, who were later kicked out, and the body of the rank and file of the party who still believe in the Marxist-Leninist line of the party and support of the revolution and all that. So we created the 10-mayor group. Of course, first, comrades in Europe formed their own group, and we in the US and North America created our own group. But after a while, we both merged into, of course, not all of them from all groups, but we created a unified group called 10-mayor, which 10-mayor is actually the birth date. It's October 2nd. Mayor is the 7th month of Iranian calendar. And 10-mayor is equivalent to 2nd October.
Yes.
1920. That was the birthday of the party. That's so we wanted to go back to the birth ideas of the party and move forward from there. That is what that 10-mayor is. We have very prominent comrades who have been, part of previous leadership, previously been part of the leadership, including Central Committee, Political Bureau, and all that. So we are fighting. So far, we have decided, we have our red lines. We have decided that we are not going to announce ourselves as an alternative to the party, as a separate party. We still believe in one party for each country. But we are hoping that our pressures from outside will force either those who are inside the party to correct their line or kick out the Social Democrats. Then together we have our party back. That's where things are.
Well, thank you for that explanation, comrade. That's a really good and detailed look into the fate of the Tudeh party after the 1980s. I think there's a lot in there that, although with national differences, that does mirror the similar experiences that went on in the immediate period after the Soviet counter-revolution. Similar things went on all the way across the European parties. You'll know the miserable fate of the Italian Communist Party, which its own leadership liquidated itself. The French Communist Party, the sad remains of it, sort of now flirting with a sort of tacit alliance with Emmanuel Macron. The British version, what survives of it, supports the rabidly imperialist Labour Party. So it's a similar problem, but I think the journey back to one communist party per country could only be a good one, given that everything since the Sino-Soviet split has basically turned us into microcosms, none of which has made us stronger at all. So the sooner we can all get back to one party per country, the better, comrade. So I wholeheartedly agree with you upon that point. Bahman, I want to thank you for your time today. This has been a really interesting discussion. I think that there's more that I could ask you, so I would like to conclude by asking if you'd be willing to come back at some stage to talk more about this and other issues as well.
Obviously, thank you. It would be an honor for me to be participating in your program. I really welcome that. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share some views with you.
Thank you very much. And we'll link in the show notes to the 10-mayor group's website. So comrades viewing this can see your group's analysis there as well. But it only remains for me to say, Bahman, Azad, thank you for joining me today. And I hope the audience has found this conversation as interesting as I have. I'm sure they do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Conrad.